We're going to talk about substance abuse disorders today, and particularly we'll talk about alcohol, but not because other substances aren't important, but because they follow the same pattern. And so as you're reading through, you'll see many of the same kinds of issues there. As you're looking at the videos on D2L and in MindTap, again, you'll see many of the same kinds of issues. Keep in mind that the DSM looks at substance abuse somewhat differently than the lay public. So they're looking in general at 4 different kinds of things: impaired control, social impairment, risky use, and tolerance or withdrawal. And they're doing that rather than focusing on the amount that people consume. So you can consume a small amount and still have a problem. You can consume a lot and not have a problem. So this is your alcohol use disorder diagnosis. So we're talking about a problematic pattern of alcohol use leading to clinically significant impairment or distress. So no problem, no problem. Manifested by at least 2 of the following. We're talking 2 for a mild disorder and at least 6 of the 11 symptoms, so it's on this and the next slide, for a severe problem. And these have to occur within a 12-month period. Taken in larger amounts or over a longer period, persistent desire or unsuccessful efforts to cut down. You're trying to and always end up drinking more than you want. Spending a lot of time in activities necessary to obtain, use, or recover. So perhaps, the next morning as you are recovering from your hangover, maybe whatever you're doing in order to get substances, cravings or strong desires or urges to use alcohol, recurrent alcohol use despite failure to fulfill major role obligations, so you're not getting reports in on time, you're missing assignments, you're missing your child's school play, despite persistent or recurrent social or interpersonal problems, so it may be causing fights between you and your partner or with your children, or that you've stopped doing things that are used to be fun because of alcohol use. Or we're also seeing using alcohol in physically hazardous situations. So for example, someone who's drinking and driving, or drinking while working a backhoe, drinking at a factory job. Use is continued despite knowledge of recurrent physical or psychological problems that are caused by or exacerbated by alcohol. So for example, someone with liver disease who continues to drink alcohol. Or I had a former student who had emphysema, was told to stop smoking and would not. Tolerance, need for markedly increased amounts of alcohol to achieve intoxication. So, maybe when you first started drinking, we were talking maybe 1 or 2 drinks to get you a good buzz. And at this point, maybe, considerably more. And that has less effect. Also, some withdrawal symptoms, is another option. Including withdrawal syndrome, or using something, such as a benzodiazepine in order to avoid those symptoms. So here are those withdrawal symptoms. Keep in mind that we're talking about at least 2 of those 11 symptoms. So the previous version of the DSM differentiated between abuse, alcohol abuse, and alcohol dependence. This version says alcohol, you know, or there is a disorder, and we can think about it on a continuum. As we're talking about substances, think about the huge costs associated with it. Billions of dollars lost, many people killed each year, either through disease or accidents. A lot of serious social problems and crimes are associated with substance use. And in colleges, associated with a lot of problems. So, non-binge drinkers are reported being insulted or humiliated by those who were binge drinkers, reported being pushed, hit, or assaulted, having to take care of someone who was drunk, interrupted in their study, or experiencing an unwanted sexual advance. Florida Atlantic is looked here at the relationship between alcohol use and grades, and you see this correlation between these. Now, this is a correlation, and let's put on our thinking caps and remember that correlation isn't causation. There are probably other things that heavy drinkers are doing. However, it probably isn't helping. If we're looking at high school students, substance use takes a fair amount of forms, both illicit and legal. And I think that one of the things we should be thinking about in this chapter is that it's not just that, or we're not just talking about illegal substances. We're not just saying that marijuana and ecstasy and cocaine and heroin are problems and these other drugs are not. Instead, what we should probably be thinking about is that both illegal and legal drugs are or can be some real problems, and we need to be addressing them in whatever setting we're working with. Substances occur in a context. So in general, alcohol use has decreased within recent years, although membership in Alcoholics Anonymous has increased significantly. Alcohol consumption is about a third of what it was in the early 1800s. And part of that is that right now we have refrigeration and don't have to consume alcoholic beverages because we have other options. And use of other illicit drugs has dropped. Most people consider themselves, light drinkers or abstainers, although over 50% report currently using. About 15 million people are alcohol dependent, mostly among whites. Some people resolve their alcohol problems without treatment, but we're only talking about some. And one of the things to keep in mind, and I'll talk about this, repeatedly, is that violence is associated with alcohol, although alcohol alone does not cause aggression, that there are other things that are also happening at the same time. As we're thinking about addictiveness, it doesn't necessarily correlate well with our culture's reactions towards drugs. This is a Doonesbury cartoon. Zonka Harris says, why are we, focusing so much on marijuana use when it doesn't kill anyone, and yet we, tolerate addictive drugs like tobacco and alcohol. Substance abuse work can be fairly difficult, and I think those of you, and I know that there are several of you who are substance abuse majors, that what you want to be thinking about is that substances, or that people with a substance abuse disorder also often have a comorbid disorder that's probably underneath the other disorder. And so we want to be thinking about perhaps they're self-medicating. That's sometimes difficult to distinguish because the drug and the disorder may, have overlapping kinds of consequences. I'm not going to talk about this, but I wanted to really point to this and say that as we are looking at substance use, we need to be thinking about what else might explain why someone is using and abusing substances. We want to be thinking when someone overdoses, what else might be going on here? And in this case, they're talking about her being anorexic, they're talking about, about suicide. And what she argues is that she's trying to stop her brain. Those of you who are thinking carefully about this might be thinking that this is a woman with bipolar disorder. As we're thinking about drug use, you notice that drug use seems or is correlated with age. In this case, particularly traditional college-age students, late teens. You see also some of the gender issues. So most of the disorders we've been talking about this semester have had female biases. This is one of the first with a male bias. So more males than females being diagnosed with a substance abuse or alcohol abuse problem at every age. If we're looking across races, you see that most drinking, or the highest rates of drinking, are in whites. Although if you look at American Indian or Alaska Natives, so the third bar over, and you're looking at the blue and gold part of the bar, you see that more Native Americans are binging or using alcohol in a very heavy way, and more than in any other group. This bar, or this figure, looks at issues from a little bit different point of view. And here we're looking at the consequences associated with using substances. While most substance use is among whites, you see that, so whites are the green bar, you see that blacks and Hispanics, so the light olive and the light blue, you see that they are much more likely to experience some of the negative consequences associated with substance use, being in prison or having HIV/AIDS. So go back to the DSM criteria and think about your behavior. Other things can meet the DSM criteria. So for example, the internet, chocolate, and sex. Why or why not should you consider these behaviors problems? And take care.